talking about today. Jonathan has led all of us on this amazing tour of the world of the truthers, the people who dispute the truth about what happened on 9/11, and we will have some disputation of that truth today. I think I have great confidence in the human species that while many of us are foolish, the species as a whole is wise. That human beings arrive at truth through disputation, and that in every era and every time there are wild allegations that are thrown out, they are strained away by history. And I have no doubt that will be the outcome of our process here today. And with that, let me begin with Jonathan Kay, who will speak for 20 minutes, and then proceed to Mr. Tarpley. Thank you.
Already slanted.
I know, already biased.
Thanks very much. I admire David's confidence that the truth would emerge. After looking at the comment thread of a lot of the newspaper articles on my website, I kind of have less faith in the human capacity for reason. But I imagine that we have senior minds in the audience tonight. David is quite right when he said that humans are pattern-seeking creatures. It's pretty much the theme of my book. Humans can handle good, they can handle evil. What humans are not good at is handling chaos. And most early efforts for humans for creating religions, philosophies, was about imposing a sort of moral order on the universe. Essentially explaining the ageless question of why bad things happen to good people. And that is why monotheistic religions are so popular. Because whatever happens in the world, no matter how random or miserable or agonizing it seems to be, there is some explanation that it fits into some cosmic pattern, even if it's a pattern that we can't recognize. Now, conspiracy theories are unlike religions in the sense that conspiracy theories do not supply God. But conspiracy theories do supply something that arguably is just as valuable. They supply demons. And when you're looking to answer the question of why do bad things happen to good people, whether it's terrorism or financial crisis or war, demons are very useful things to have around. And if you have a conspiracy theory that finds a demon, gives it a name, then you have a very simple answer to the question of why terrorism happens, or why wars happen, or why people's businesses go bankrupt. It's because of the Freemasons, or it's because of the Illuminati, or it's because of the Zionists, or it's because of the Muslims,
Jamie Dimon,
or it's because of the Bilderbergers, or it's because of the New World Order. As I argue in my book, the actual identity of the villain is somewhat beside the point. What matters in terms of the psychology of conspiracy theories is that all evil has a single unitary address. And although the world of a conspiracy theorist's mind can be a very dark place, it's full of evil plots and plane flying into buildings and smoke-filled rooms, in a sense, there's good news that comes out of it, which is that if evil has a name, and if evil has an address, then we can fight evil. We can uncover it. Whether it's George Bush or whether it's United Nations, it doesn't matter. We know what evil is, we know where evil lives, and we can dedicate our lives to telling other people the truth, which is what a lot of people do on the internet. And this struggle becomes liberating for a lot of people, and it becomes somewhat utopian, because the idea is once this evil is uncovered, once the truth is known, then the world will be a better place. Now, let me get back to the book and the people I interviewed for it, including Mr. Tarpley, who was kind enough to give me his time. When I started writing my book, I was interviewed a wide variety of conspiracy theorists all around the United States. And when I started off, my first question was, what do you believe? Tell me your theory of 9/11. Or tell me your theory of how Barack Obama became president, or how the pharmaceutical companies are conspiring against us, or how financial crisis was created, stuff like that. This turns into something of a dead end. Because when you talk to a conspiracy theorist, you ask them that open-ended question, you can end up sitting there for about 8 hours. Modern conspiracy theories tend to be extraordinarily technical. That's why I somewhat pity Mr. Tarpley. He only has 20 minutes. I'm sure he could speak for hours and hours and hours. For me, it's somewhat simpler. I'm going to tell you all I know in 20.
Pablum, just believe it.
So that was sort of
Move along.
When I talked to
Obi-Wan.
9/11 conspiracy theorists, I asked them, tell me what happened on 9/11. And I would get a very technical narrative about what happened with NORAD, how the Twin Towers fell, the metallurgical properties of the beams in Twin Tower 1 and 2. And after a while, I started asking a different question, which I found was much more interesting and became the basis for my book. And the question was, when did you start believing all this? When did you start believing that 9/11 was an inside job? Or when did you start believing that Barack Obama's presidency was illegitimate? And then the answers became much more interesting. Because then I was getting to the root of the issue, which was, when did you lose your faith in the narrative that's being told to you by your government and by the media? When did you start to believe that the reality around us that we're being told by our media is a lie? And people told me some very interesting things. In the case of 9/11, for instance, what I found is that most people who joined the 9/11 truth movement, they didn't join it in 2001. They joined it in 2003, and in particular the spring and summer of 2003. Because when they heard there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, they asked themselves the question, the government lied to me about that, what else is the government lying to me about? And once people ask that question, and that question becomes the guiding question of their life, they can go to some pretty dark places and go into some pretty dark rabbit holes. Now, I think it's an important question to ask. It's the very basis of my profession. I'm a journalist. And unless you do ask that question, when is the government lying to you and when is it telling the truth, there's no such thing as investigative journalism. All you have is press releases from the government. But once the idea that the government is always lying to you and the media is always lying to you becomes a sort of religious faith, then you become a full-time conspiracy theorist. And the answers I got for when people believe this stuff was very interesting. As I say, for 9/11, it tended to be in 2003. It tended to be the lack of weapons of mass destruction. When I talked to Barack Obama conspiracy theorists, the so-called birthers, for them it tends to be right at the moment that Barack Obama became president. I mean, these are people, they were all conservatives, and the idea of America electing a liberal Democrat to the White House just caused their political faith in America to just shatter. And they became convinced that his presidency must be illegitimate in some cosmic sense. Many of them devoted their life to proving that he was in fact an illegitimate president. There was one fellow that I interviewed, I wrote him about in chapter one of my book. He's a Canadian, he's of Serbian ancestry. He actually played in the NFL with the New York Jets. And he became radicalized in 1999 during the Kosovo War. He turned on his TV, he saw images of NATO warplanes dropping bombs on Belgrade. He just couldn't believe the narrative he was hearing from the mass media, which was that the Serbians were killing Kosovar Albanians. He thought it must be an international conspiracy against Serbia. And 2 years later, 9/11, he saw the events of that day through the same conspiratorial lens. And he thought if there was a conspiracy against Serbia in 1999, then this was some kind of inside job too. And this is a phenomenon you see over and over and over in conspiracy circles. Once they see the world through distrustful eyes and they think they're being lied to, that colors their perceptions of all subsequent events. In fact, many of the people I interviewed for my book are conspiracy theorists from the JFK era. And they just basically never stopped seeing the world as one big conspiracy. The question I get is, are there real conspiracies? You know, I've written this book about conspiracy theories. Surely there are real conspiracies. Of course there are real conspiracies. Real-life conspiracies, though, tend to be small and grubby and primarily about money and sex. Classic example in Canada, there was some, I expect no one in this room to know about this except for David, the sponsorship scandal. The sponsorship scandal was sort of Canada's Watergate of my era, I guess. And, you know, sort of a small-scale thing involving a bunch of operatives from the Liberal Party trying to buy votes in Quebec. The thing was done amateurishly. It was quickly unraveled. Everyone involved was identified. And that's more or less how conspiracies work in government, because most people in government are incompetent, or they can't keep secrets. Watergate was another classic example of a bungled amateurish operation that took place on a fairly small scale, but had wide repercussions. The kind of much larger, more sinister, epic, soap opera type conspiracies like 9/11, those kind of things are completely beyond the power of incompetent government officials to pull off, even if they wanted to pull them off, which is dubious, because they simply lack the ability to do that kind of thing in secret.
It's called the Federal Reserve.
We have a lot of people in the room apparently have great faith in our government leaders to pull off these incredible operations. But one thing, again,
Not leaders, the Federal Reserve.
if you are in Syria and someone says to you, hey, I think the government is conspiring to kill us, that's not a conspiracy theory. If there's a tank down the street firing shells at you, it's not a conspiracy theory that someone in Iran or North Korea or Syria, that the government is trying to kill you. And I make that very clear in my book. And that's because those are closed societies where the governments truly do control all the levers of power. There's no independent political system. There's no independent media. So if government elites want to conspire to murder thousands of their citizens, they can do that.
Vaccines.
That kind of thing is very difficult to do in Western open societies. Because we have an independent media. Because we have an independent...
Give me a break.
When I give a speech, I mention the media, I always get laugh lines from folks like that. They say, oh, the media independent, that's crazy. I wish the people who are laughing could be the National Post offices or any media office of the last 10 years and see how many people who used to be on our payroll have become independent freelancers and answer to nobody. And those people truly are independent, and they're independent through nobody's will. It's not on their own free will that they're independent. They've basically been fired. This is the state of the modern media. So the idea that I am an editor, or that Dave Firm, or that anybody can control America's media or Canada's media, anybody who's been a practicing journalist knows that this isn't true.
Banker bailouts.
In terms of 9/11, if 9/11 truly were an inside job, and I say this as a journalist, if 9/11 truly were an inside job, you would have 100,000 American journalists trying to win the Pulitzer Prize, finding the truth and publishing. If Barack Obama truly was born in Kenya or Indonesia or wherever they're saying he was born now, again, same deal. You could get your prize by doing it. If 9/11 truly was an inside job, you'd get every single Democratic activist in Washington on the story because you'd be able to discredit the GOP for the next 50 years by telling the story. So things function very differently in closed societies where large-scale government conspiracies are possible over the long term, and open societies where they're not. And I wanted to give, before I finish, I want to give two examples. Selected from the day's headlines. Does anyone in this room know who Lene Williams is? I know about Lene Williams because she was profiled on the Daily Beast. 35-year-old woman who lives here in the Washington, D.C. area. In 2009, she worked for the CIA. They even sent her to Iraq. She went to spy camp. I'm sure she went to the museum. She learned the art of spycraft through the CIA. However, she had a falling out with the CIA back in 2009. They thought she was unstable. She was in a hospital for a while. And as a result of that, she no longer works for the CIA. But she did something that you couldn't do 5 years or 10 years ago. She started tweeting about her experience. So if you look up Lene Williams on Twitter, you will find a Twitter stream from a woman tweeting secret stuff about the CIA. How is it possible in a society where some disgruntled former CIA employee is tweeting about the CIA for there to be any kind of centralized conspiracy about 9/11 or anything else that isn't instantly disclosed? In all the millions of cables from WikiLeaks, was there one thing about any kind of 9/11 inside job?
It was CIA enemies.
See, there you go. Okay, one more thing. Because again, this world of conspiracies is a very dark place, and we try and do a thought experiment. What would happen if someone went to a high-ranking government official or someone in the military and said, hey, let's stage a coup. Let's replace the current government with some kind of fascist corporate oligarch.
Kenya.
And I mention this because this is more or less the theme of a lot of the 9/11 conspiracy stuff we read.
Prescott Bush tried it.
All right, well, here's someone else who tried it. And again, I know this because the book just came out. It's often in
Zingo in Kenya.
She just wrote a great book. It's called The Plot Against the President. And it's about all the fascistic intrigue he gave to FDR back in 1933, 1934. And it's a fascinating story in there about a general named Smedley Butler. Now, Smedley Butler is not a household name now, but back in his day, 30s, he was sort of a Colin Powell of his era. He was an extremely popular general. And one day, someone knocked on his door. The stories were recounted in his book by Sally Duncan. And it was your stereotypical emissaries from the military-industrial complex. And they had a big fat checkbook, they had Wall Street money. And they went to Smedley Butler and they said, you know what?